the future
welcoming the 34th Chief of Naval Operations. Well, good afternoon. It's great to see everyone here today on a blustery post-Super Bowl weekend. Provosts, deans, CNO distinguished fellows, senior service representatives, students, faculty, and staff. Thank you all for joining us. I do want to acknowledge some of the base leadership, base CEO, Captain Henry Ronke. See Henry right there. From Swissick, Joe Baggett, Captain Joe Baggett. Dills, the Deputy Director, Miss Wind. From NAPS, Captain Clarity, and from NLEC, Captain Frolic. I thank you all and your teams for being here today. I'm truly honored to have our guest speaker here and to be able to introduce the 34th Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Daryl Caudle. He's a 1985 graduate of North Carolina State University. His career started right here across the bay there at OCS. Prior to assuming his current position as the 34th Chief of Naval Operations, he was the commander of U.S. Fleet Forces Command. He has commanded at every level. If you think tactically, operationally, and now strategically, post-job and current job, he has done it all. I'd also like to welcome his wife, Donna. I know she is here doing an engagement here, but she flew up today with the CNO, and she is the Navy's co-ombudsman at large, and I appreciate the work that she does for the men and women for the Navy and the Marine Corps. It's truly great to have you here, sir, today at the home of the Navy's home of thought, the Naval War College, an integral part of our Navy's Foundry, educating tomorrow's leaders to support the fleet and preparing warfighters for the fight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 34th Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Daryl Caudle.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It is an absolute honor to be back in the halls of Navy Thought, the home of thought, a prestigious institution charged with educating, training, and inculcating our future leaders of our naval forces. Rear Admiral Walker, D-Day, thank you for that warm introduction, and thanks to you and your team for opening the War College doors as I unveil our fleet's newest strategic guidance, the United States Navy Fighting Instructions. As the intellectual minds who will one day lead our naval, joint, and allied and inter-organizational organizations, it was important for me to make this my first stop. To all of our students in the audience and here at the War College, congratulations on your selection to attend this incredible school. The very same institution over which the world's most influential naval strategist, Alfred Thayer Mahan, presided. In the same vein, let me continue by acknowledging your exceptional network of professors and staff. Your time at Newport, the long hours, late nights, and big thinking to sharpen our competitive advantage would not be possible without those who so selflessly poured themselves into your education. On behalf of our entire United States Navy team and our allied navies around the world, I am deeply grateful for what you do. I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge my predecessors, the ones who bore the weight of this office and the tremendous responsibility to define, develop, and deliver a Navy capable of fighting and winning our nation's wars. From Greener's sailing directions to Richardson's design for maintaining maritime superiority and our previous two CNO's navigation plans, each of these leaders deeply understood the challenges of their time. In their own moments of consequential leadership, these CNOs laid out their own strategic guidance to our fleet, meaningfully moving the needle on our Navy's readiness to get after our most pressing challenges. Each offered the right plans at the right time to sustain our combat readiness while directing the future force design and service concepts of our all-domain fleet. But today we find ourselves operating in an era with other great powers, an era in which the speed of decision ruthlessly punishes delay. Therefore, it is in these complex times that we must evolve our strategy once more, rapidly responding to new leadership direction, technological advances, asymmetric attack vectors, and systemic industrial-based challenges. Despite these many obstacles, an undeniable truth continues to persist, that the requirement for a strong, resilient, and globally present Navy has never been more important to our nation's defense. A lethal, resilient, and agile Navy that can swiftly respond to emerging crises, diffuse asymmetric threats, and engage across a wide variety of missions contingent to sustained operations at sea. We must organize, train, and equip our forces to deliver peace through strength and preserve our national security interests while standing to deter those who would challenge our way of life. As such, we are calibrating our sights, refining our course, and transforming our approach to get after our Navy's most consequential challenges with an enduring set of scalable options and concepts. Just as our Navy once navigated transformational periods of change, from the age of sail to the age of steam and the age of nuclear propulsion and power projection, we must once again navigate an unprecedented period of convergence, the age of competitive innovation. This past year alone, we stood witness to the tides of global disruption, the decades-long global security environment continuing to erode, our list of pacing threats continuing to grow, and our adversaries evolving in technological sophistication and brazen ambition. Whether it's by way of gray zone tactics, the militarization of foreign industrial bases, or the unlikely integration of state and non-state actors, the United States Navy must similarly adapt our theory of victory to combat each of these regional and existential threats. And while all these factors continue to shape the strategic laydown of the fleet around the globe, our Navy continues to navigate our own decisive rip currents at home. The once formidable arsenal of diplomacy and democracy that enabled our forces to sweep seamlessly across the European and Pacific theaters of war continues to lag well behind contracted demand. And by my own assessment, I think lacks sufficient creativity, adaptability, and vision. Years of deferred maintenance and investments have reduced our shipyards, munition factories, and naval installations to hollow shells of their once great capacity and scale. But all is not lost. For the first time in my career, from the Oval Office in Capitol Hill to the halls of the Pentagon, and to perhaps most important, the American people, our nation's leadership is aligned on the enduring importance of delivering a resilient and responsive defense industrial base. The indicators are clear. President Trump and Secretary Phelan's Golden Fleet Initiative signals that a dominant United States Navy is the world's surest guarantee of peace. Secretary Phelan meant it when he says, and I fully agree, there is no future fight the Navy isn't in as an integral part of the main effort. To this point, Secretary Phelan often conveys the well-regarded saying by Alfred Thayer Mahan, to be a superpower, one must be a sea power. There should be no doubt that the strength of our Navy and our nation depends on the strength of these concepts and the strength of our Navy. Like my predecessors, I take that statement seriously with my priorities and my actions. With every ounce of resolve in my being, I am moving at warp speed to follow through on what I promised for you and the nation. Because as long as I'm CNO, I will do everything and everything necessary to ensure we never enter a fair fight and that our country will never lose. Which is why I'm here with you today. Since joining the Navy back in 1985, I have been on a journey of continuous learning. It hasn't always been linear, but the ups and downs between then and now have sharpened my perspective and honed my understanding. Consider any problem of consequence. To achieve a solutions-oriented approach, we can only drive progress by first rigorously assessing the current state of affairs. In that assessment comes the discovery of a problem that can only be addressed by some form of innovation, a new way of thinking about the problem set drivers. Only by approaching the problem with honesty and rigor can we action the necessary framework to bring that solution to bear. This process is contingent on a willingness to be intellectually honest with ourselves in our assessments, tensioning the system to gain traction along the right trajectory and hit our target on the mark. The same school of thought has been applied to the U.S. Navy fighting instructions, which in their simplest form are designed to provide a conceptual framework for modern warfare, delivering homeland defense, sustaining our global network of deterrence, and preserving our national prosperity. It forms my overarching guidance that outlines which investments matter most, the asymmetric capabilities we need to forge, and how those capabilities should be packaged and certified. To what extent can those ensembles operate autonomously? And finally, the requisite levels of technical mastery that will enable our sailors to fight and win across all time horizons. As such, the U.S. Navy Fighting Instructions is our Navy's answer to the daunting question that will define modern naval warfare for decades to come. How do we ensure we can fight and win across the spectrum of conflict under conditions we cannot entirely predict, against adversaries who are increasingly capable, innovative, and aggressive at near parity levels, simultaneously in key areas of vital national interest around the world? To get after this problem statement, it was important for me to take a step back and to understand what services and capabilities our Navy uniquely provides and to which stakeholders. As CNO, I have a lot of jobs, but from my perspective in the E-ring, perhaps at the top of the list is the need to communicate the value proposition of why our Navy matters to the joint force and to the nation, a need to develop a deep understanding across all Navy stakeholders. I believe that idea shapes the core of any organizational strategy, which comes down to defining, highlighting, and conveying our differentiated value. In short, our differentiated value provides the overarching framework for the fighting instructions to launch from. So what is our differentiated value? From the perspective of the American people, our Navy assures homeland defense from seabed to space, ensuring our lawful sovereignty over natural resources and protection of our shores against foreign and domestic threats are in place, all of which spans across a whopping 4.5 million square miles of exclusive economic zones. We deliver global stability and deterrence, whether it's our carrier strike groups or our ballistic missile submarines, or our gray holes on the horizon that symbolize hard military power. We keep sea lines of communication open to stimulate our economy, preserve our national prosperity, and bolster our wealth. With nearly 70% of trade moving by sea, the daily presence of our Navy around the globe ensures that Americans can live, work, buy, sell, and trade with confidence and stability. From the Joint Forces perspective, we provide 7 indispensable unique missions. We deliver sea control and sea denial, maritime security, tailored and combat-credible deterrence, global replenishment across contested environments, freedom of maneuver, and power projection over the horizon with precision and mass. The bottom line is this: no other Navy, no other joint or combined force in the world can do what we do. The outsized contributions we deliver across the spectrum of conflict is what separates us from our allies and partners. And that same value is what will ensure our place as the world's preeminent fighting force for decades to come. Once you understand why our Navy matters, only then can you define what our Navy must deliver. Further, it ensures that our resources are prioritized and executed to never lose that special sauce that is our differentiated value and what it provides, which in turn is the answer to our problem, and by the way of the fighting instructions, takes the form of the core implementation concept of a full spectrum hedge strategy. As my thinking has evolved over the last several years, it has become poignantly clear to me that our Navy's approach to our theory of combat could no longer be based on capability overmatch, setting theater conditions with impunity and winning by mass dominance alone. Under the constraints of an ever-lowering cost of entry and the proliferation of asymmetric capabilities, coupled with simultaneous peer conflicts, the nation needs a Navy that can hedge tailored solutions aggressively, innovate continuously, fight distributively, and command with clarity across the global network of complex battle spaces and domains. This hedge strategy will be implemented through a set of initiatives, some new and familiar, that combine to enable a fleet that can learn, adapt, and counter adversaries by optimizing and force multiplying across our differentiated value. These include blunting adversary advantages with our own innovations, or what we're calling tailored offsets, which are organized into tailored forces, ensuring we can make the best use of our units and off-cycle force generation through combat surge-ready certifications as part of the Global Maritime Response Plan. An enhanced mission command framework defining how we command forward, delivering and making good on the recently released Navy warfighting concept, which is tied inextricably to the joint warfighting concept, and by designing and implementing a new Navy deterrence concept that works hand in glove with the warfighting concept to improve our global posture, enhance our campaigning objectives, and strengthen our ability to shape competitor behavior, decision calculus, and the respective battle space. In its most rudimentary form, the hedge strategy accepts fiscal, industrial, and operational realities and still demands a Navy that is lethal, agile, responsive, and flexible. It balances cost-effective, scalable, risk-worthy mass with the most advanced multi-mission platforms we can build and sustain, while taking stock in the likelihood of pacing scenarios and the severity of risk that's attached. When you consider the unique capabilities our Navy already provides, you'll notice hedges are prevalent in almost everything we do already. Naval Special Forces and Special Operators, which are less than 2% of our forces, are the nation's hedge against low-intensity and irregular warfare threats. Our ballistic missile submarines and E-6B Mercuries, less than 6% of the Navy, are the pinnacle of our nation's nuclear triad and is our hedge against nuclear conflict and strategic attack. Our global network of allies and partners are our enduring hedge when our resources and presence are constrained. And when crisis erupts or conflict breaks out, the Navy is the joint forces' ultimate hedge, able to move fast, stay forward, and deliver sovereign options from the sea. We flow forces on a moment's notice off the coast of foreign shores, to the waters of the Middle East, to the frigid ice caps below the North Pole, and across the expansive waters of the Pacific. No matter the scenario, our differentiated value allows us to be anywhere in the world, full up round, ready to go in a matter of weeks. So the hedge strategy is a means of thoughtfully bringing the full weight of our maritime forces to bear, providing relevant capabilities for each situation, while ensuring the credibility and efficacy of our differentiated value persist. However, building a fleet to cover every pressing scenario is not only cost and risk prohibitive, but a disservice to the taxpayer and less effective operationally. In our rich 250-year history, seldom have we built, designed, and generated a force that was employed exactly as we intended. If history has taught us anything, it's that forces designed for high-end warfare are most likely to be employed for low-end scenarios and contingencies. Whether you build a Navy for high consequence, low probability, or low consequence, high probability scenarios. In either case, you're left with an over or undersubscribed force that's sub-optimized to address specific use cases, which may never come to bear. What hedge strategy avoids is a brittle, single-purpose force that is either overbuilt for the high-end fight or underused day to day, or optimized for low-end crisis and overmatched when it counts. This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. By design, the hedge strategy is intended to be a force multiplier to our general purpose forces, working in concert with sailors and platforms of our traditionally manned fleet. And I fully acknowledge the need for a bigger fleet. The President and the Secretary of the Navy share that same sentiment, as evidenced by the recent announcement of the Golden Fleet initiatives. But the challenge becomes determining where to snap the chalk line, how much of each force element is truly enough. That is what the hedge strategy aims to do. It buys down risk in some areas, shifts risk to others, but in the end, unabashedly embraces risk to the tip in order to tip the scales to our advantage. To achieve this end, we must buy, field, and posture ready capabilities, tailored forces, and tailored offsets to address specific situations that are too consequential to ignore, but too unlikely to drive our overall fleet design. As a whole, tailored forces and tailored offsets are scalable formations that manage risk, expand mass, force multiply, improve response options, and preserve our combat advantage. Tailored forces are the composite packaging of tailored offsets certified to address specific missions in particular regions. They include general purpose units from the main battle force, surface combatants, patrol aircraft, and submarines for deployment and command and control. Whether it's conducting anti-submarine warfare in the North Atlantic, clandestine mine warfare across critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, or supporting fires in a Taiwan Strait scenario, tailored forces with tailored certifications will allow our Navy to hedge against any likelihood of any threat in any theater without constraining our force design around a single pressing scenario. Tailored offsets are systems and platforms that are the easiest to adapt and combine in ways that address high consequence, low probability situations while improving lethality at better levels of acceptable risk. Capabilities like attritable and easily replenishable USVs, MUSVs designed for scouting, screening, and striking, UUVs for water space denial, survey, and mine warfare, and low-cost, high-volume interceptors for counter-drone defense. Together, these tailored capabilities will amplify and complement the main battle force through lethal outputs that are scalable, deployable, adaptable, and most important, cost-effective. While hedge strategy focuses on a small set of high-consequence, low-probability scenarios, we must also be able to field a fleet that can be the first responder to emerging crisis wherever they occur. It is in this respect that every part of our Navy plays an essential role. Large surface combatants and the main battle forces aren't going away. Working together in concert, every tailored capability and every Navy platform will be enabled by and enablers for each other. That's where the Global Maritime Response Plan and Combat Surge Ready comes into play. On any given day, the Navy has nearly 100 ships deployed around the world, 100 ships in long-term maintenance, and 100 ships throughout various cycles of our force generation model. Through a well-defined and deliberate approach, the Global Maritime Response Plan aims to do more with those 100 ships in the workup and sustainment phases of our force generation model so that they can readily flow into conflict. The GMRP provides a scalable plan empowered by decision support matrices and authority transfer processes to certify and deploy those units when called into action. As defined through a series of response conditions, the GMRP ties force generation to indications and warning of adversary behavior, ultimately hedging our bets against deterrence shortfalls while denying adversary opportunism. GMRP is what for the first time defines how to flow the tip fit in conflict through formal orders and condition-based assessments. Actively engaged with GMRP is our structure to provide emergent response options for the President through our combat surge-ready forces. CSR is a level of readiness and formal designation for tailored forces. For each respective type commander has certified that a crew and their platform are ready to fight, providing they can shoot, maneuver, communicate, and defend as the tactical environment and acceptable level of risk demand. CSR is what actually optimizes the OFRP. Now let me shift to the question of what ties all this together. How do we command and control this fight? My priorities of Foundry, Fleet, and Fight are not abstract ideas. They are a warfighting system, and in the next conflict, that system will be tested under pressure, at speed, and under fire. The environment we are selling into will be contested from the opening minute. Communications will be disrupted. Space and cyber will be under attack, and the enemy will try to fracture our kill chains, slow our decisions, and isolate our forces. In that kind of fight, we cannot afford a Navy that waits for permission. We will operate with forces ranging from unmanned systems at the edge to submarines forward to carrier strike groups maneuvering at scale. The only way to fight effectively across that span is to ensure that every force element at every level can sense, synthesize, decide, and act fast enough with enough confidence to achieve commander's intent. That's why to fight at the timing, tempo, and synchronization demanded by the head strategy, the Navy will implement the Enhanced Mission Command Framework. Mission Command cannot be something we fall back on when networks fail. Mission Command must be how we prepare, practice, and fight all the time. This Mission Command Framework begins with the assumption that communications will be degraded, contested, or denied, and that our forces must still execute. So instead of rigid hierarchies and constant reach back, we will build a fleet that operates through empowered, self-organizing teams, commanders who understand the mission, own the intent, and act with disciplined initiative. This is not decentralization for its own sake. This is a modern warfighting imperative. Enhanced Mission Command gives us a clear way to delegate decision authority across the force, matching autonomy to capacity and capability, and authority that demands of the tactical situation. Through delegated autonomy levels, we will define what a unit, manned or unmanned, can do independently, based on its ability to sense the battle space, synthesize what matters, and deliver effects without waiting for higher headquarters. Because in the fight, the unit that can act first wins. And at the end of the day, autonomy is not unlimited. It is designed and it is governed. It is a function of two things: the tactical condition the unit faces and the level of risk we are prepared to accept to seize the initiative. This is how we will command forward. This is how we will fight through disruption. And this is how the fleet will stay aligned, lethal, and fast, even when the enemy is trying to break the system. The Foundry builds it, the fleet trains it, and the fight demands it. The Enhanced Mission Command Framework will ensure we are ready, not for the last war, but for the one that's coming. Which brings me to the final input of our fighting instructions. In order to hedge appropriately, this strategy must indeed be guided by authoritative naval concepts. Last month, I formally signed into action a Navy warfighting concept, the Navy's overarching warfighting approach. It tells commanders how we intend to fight, where we will accept risk, and where we will not. And it conveys a proactive approach that uses the global maritime maneuver space to gain and exploit sea control while imposing sea denial. The Navy warfighting concept is by no means meant to sit on a shelf and collect dust. It is meant to be executed by the fleets, squadrons, and ships at sea, and should be alive and well in the minds, planning, exercises, and operations of commanders at every level. But if you look at the global disposition of our forces, and all warfighting is what we are designed to do, it only accounts for only a fraction of our daily operations. In every domain around the world, our Navy forces are actively campaigning in order to deter our adversaries. I would argue, in fact, that the act of deterrence accounts for over 90% of our day-to-day activities. We have a Navy warfighting concept which defines what and how we will fight, but importantly, we will need a Navy deterrence concept that defines who and how we will deter. Because deterrence activities dominate the preponderance of what our forces do day to day around the world. The question is, what's the ROI of our campaigning efforts? Is it working? How do we know? And what are the measures of success? Of all the white binders in your workspaces, I would wager there's not one that gives you a clear, formalized approach to what deterrence at sea really means. It's an ill-defined practice where the players come and go, yet it defines our operations in nearly everything we do day to day. As the world's premier maritime force, we must be eyes wide open and acknowledge that deterrence is an infinite game. It's a concept that to work must live continuously in the minds of our adversaries and in turn allow us to shape their behavior to cause desired effects. Deterrence is the last and final tripwire to conflict, and the Navy deterrence concept takes that responsibility head on. It will explicitly define who we're deterring and from what, and where we're specifically preventing them from doing. It will help us decide where to posture forces, where they should be to shape behavior, and how do we need to tune the intelligence community for the feedback necessary to assess our activities. Bottom line, the Navy deterrence concept is my way of formalizing a deterrence kill chain, defining escalation dominance, and codifying that into doctrine. Ladies and gentlemen, on my first day in office, I released my 3 priorities: the Foundry, the fleet, and the way we fight. These priorities were a simple but effective way for me to convey my vision to our forces around the world with clarity and focus. They expounded upon Secretary Phelan's priorities and emphasized the need to view everything we do through an operational lens. Underpinned by the Foundry, the fleet, and the way we fight, the United States Navy Fighting Instructions is a transformational framework that will guide us to a more enduring end state, taking us from the as-is, where capability drives strategy, to our final destination, where strategy drives our force design, our tailored force packages, and an investment trajectory to make every dollar count. As the center of this vision will always be the United States Navy sailor. They are our most enduring strategic advantage, our primary weapons system, and the heartbeat of our world-class Navy. Within each priority, you'll notice that people, our sailors, are the underlying center of gravity. Every policy we produce, every change we implement, and with every strategy we employ revolves around these priorities. They are the ultimate link within every kill chain, which guides everything we do and serve as the bedrock of my guidance. As I begin to close, let me leave you with this. Admiral Hyman G. Rickover, the father of the nuclear Navy, once said, and I quote, "The great end of life is not knowledge, but action." He believed that our duty was to act as if the fate of the world depended on us, to live for the future and not for our own comfort or success. In every ocean around the world, our Navy remains at the tip of the operational spear, sailing, flying, and steaming at the decisive edge of lethality. With our battle-ready sailors leading the way, there is no challenge too great or goal out of reach that our Navy won't meet. And that's exactly what these fighting instructions aim to do. Provide our sailors with a new way to think about our challenges, a new way to leverage the asymmetric advantages, capabilities, and structures to fight and win today, tomorrow, and into an uncertain future. As Admiral Rickover reminded us, the future belongs to those who act. Through disciplined execution and a clear-eyed approach, we honor that charge, defending our country, deterring our adversaries, and preserving our place as the most formidable fighting force the world has ever known. Our Navy requires it, our nation demands it, And for the American people, we will follow through with urgency, discipline, and results. Thank you. Okay, that's a lot. Meaty, about 30 minutes worth. It's the longest speech I've ever given in my career, okay? And I know it can go a bit on, but I wanted this for the record, and I wanted to do it right here, okay? It was important. We talked about this in my office, about where to roll this out, and this is where we had to roll this out. I'm heading out to, I leave here and I fly to California to West, the symposium out there, and made this my first stop on this trip to actually roll this out here, D-Day, because it needs to be, the Navy fighting instructions need to be rolled out at the center of Navy thought. So I really appreciate you indulging me in getting through that. So let's answer some questions. Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm sorry, you're going to moderate this.
Good afternoon, Admiral. I'm Captain Francesco Rima, Italian Navy. I'm also the president of the Naval Command College, so thank you on behalf of my classmates. We are 44 nations here, so we appreciate a lot of this. Going to the question, and relying also on the alliance and partnership point of view. How does the Navy translate the strategic principle you mentioned, and also the national security strategy, when it comes to expectations on the involvement of allied and partners in different scenarios, in different environments, especially when it comes with mission command, integration, as you mentioned, and operational risk sharing? How is your perspective on those expectations? Thank you, sir.
So I want to make sure I get this. It's really about how I'm integrating allies and partners, right? Okay. Yeah, with response to the national security strategy, which I'm sure everyone in here has read. If you haven't, you're delinquent. Sure, you've read the National Defense Strategy too. And what's really prevalent in those two strategies is a refocus on homeland defense, which we have had in many strategies, but not so clearly laid out that the Western Hemisphere is an area of predominant importance to the President and the national security apparatus. And of course, the Western Pacific, First Island chain is of course important. And then, we continue to have, additional, peer competitors in this space. Russia is remains to be a challenge for us, of course. We see where our forces are in the Middle East today with Iran and of course North Korea, counterterrorism, and so many other attack vectors that are unique to the time we live in. And that's why the Western Hemisphere has been so important. There's a lot of attack vectors there, from illicit trafficking to the idea of the Golden Dome and those types of concepts. And the Golden Fleet itself is to allow the mechanism in the United States to work the way it's designed, to ensure we have continuity of government, continuity of decision-making, and continuity of operation. And that's when, we're at our best. So that's why it's such a focus there, on the homeland, so that we can do what we need to do as a joint force. You may have caught in my pitch there a bit that, the idea of how do we hedge effectively? And this is, it's not like some great epiphany here, but the commitment and the strategic discipline to actually hedge is actually what's new here. And you've got to have underpinning processes to do that effectively, formal processes, to be comfortable with tailoring these packages that are threat-based and certifying that without this all-up-around unit of force or nothing. So long has our military, generated strike groups, okay, and certified them to major combat operations. And meanwhile, I've got commanders that could use something perhaps less than that and actually do a lot with something less than that while they're awaiting on the full-up round to get into theater, okay? And so the idea here is to optimize, assess key operational problems globally, and to start building out force packages that are tailored for those specific scenarios with a little bit more thoughtful than an all or nothing approach. Inherent in that is the need to work with allies and partners. That has to be part of this, okay? You're going to have to cover down if I've got some things I am emphasizing as the United States and cannot be omnipresent everywhere in the world, taking a solid account of how we work together through these problems to posture your forces, everyone else, in this room's naval forces, most effectively has got to be part of this. Part of this is a clear-eyed understanding of what a theory of the fight looks like in the area we care about, okay? And then understanding each other's capabilities, and I mean intellectually, honestly understanding it, okay? Our pros and our cons, our weaknesses and our strengths, working together to help me posture in areas where the United States can't be everywhere at once, okay? And then when you actually posture like that, then understanding what are your national caveats, what are your authorities to conduct these operations to supplement this idea of hedging in that area. And then how do we interoperate, okay? And C3 across, communication systems to actually effectively do that. And then last but perhaps most important, how do we sustain each other in these theaters, in these operational key problems? So I can think of no other part of a hedge strategy, than allies and partners. It's how we force multiply. It's how I, as the United States, punch bigger than my weight class, okay? Through this synergistic approach of posturing the globe to account for things where I just can't be everywhere all the time. So I would say, to our great partners and allies in this room, the time has never been more pressing than right now to take account of the opportunity presented to you to support, the United States Navy in this venture. I look forward to doing this with everyone in the room here to figure out how to do what I'm saying effectively. But it could never be a more important time for all of us to carry our own weight here and support each other.
Morning, sir. Lieutenant Layton, student of MAS and also proud service warfare officer. I just wanted to ask, we talked a lot about deterrence. With the increase in unmanned systems and smaller tailored forces, is there a risk of more attrition warfare due to a decrease in deterrence from human casualties? And if not, how are we going to bolster that deterrence, especially in the Indo-PACOM AOR?
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. You see a little bit of this in the Russia-Ukraine fight. I do caution people on the Russia-Ukraine experiment, the petri dish, if you will, of examining how unmanned and robotic autonomous systems are working there. One of the challenges for the United States, for our, robotic and autonomous and unmanned systems, is we're going to have to launch that and go great distances and sustain that, and not necessarily just, that's not going to be just coming off the homeland, okay? That's a fundamentally different problem. And I call it the last tactical mile. I would ask for those in the room that are working in this to think about not the concept of operation or the concept of employment, but the concept of deployment. I think it's the most important thing when it comes to unmanned, okay? How you command and control this, and that's why I'm getting to this delegated autonomy levels, this tiered system to basically to be able to delegate the autonomy level of a manned system to an unmanned system in a thoughtful way to be able to sense and operate within that environment, within the rules of engagement, within the tax sit and acceptable level of risk to actually do this most effectively. So that's the structure. Now, when you have that, to get to your question of this idea of a tit-for-tat attrition, I think we got to think through how we fight this kit, okay, to keep that from being the problem. So that's why I believe it's got to enable the main effort. I don't think it can be the main effort, okay? So if you have it as an enabling capability and not the actual main effort, then I think what happens is you can achieve at least temporal, if not geographic, overmatch to achieve your decisive decision points, and actually you won't get into this tit-for-tat way, okay? So I think a smart use of this type of capability can do that. But I think we're going to have to watch it. It will be easy to get liquored up on, if you will, putting unmanned stuff out there because it's low risk, seems pretty cheap, but you just never culminate. So I'm just in this thing where I just keep shoveling it in like cordwood, but I don't culminate. Because at the end of the day, and I'm preaching to the choir here, culminating in combat requires mass, okay? And that's one of the things that, the Navy's so great at. I mean, that's why the strike groups are so important is, submarine force, we're pretty good as a submariner of driving around, clandestine, we overmatch. But, the mass I can deliver is limited by a torpedo room, okay? So at the end of the day, strike groups deliver a substantially larger mass of fires that it takes to seize the initiative, hold down the enemy, and culminate that decision point. So I don't think you can do that with unmanned alone. I just don't see a world where that's the case. I do see it, if used correctly, can actually, help us in situations to actually set the conditions for the general purpose forces to win. And that's kind of these concepts I need this institution to help me think through. The whole .MLPF needs to be thought through. We're just on the edge now thinking through how to see to it. How do we employ it? Do I need an unmanned warfare commander as part of the strike group staff? I kind of think I do. Because it's not, we tend to organize, train, and equip it based on the domain it lives in, but we don't fight it that way. What's a unit of force in unmanned? I think it's mission-based. Do you want a maritime domain package? And what would that look like? You want a strike package? What does that look like? At the end of the day, I've got to give the combatant commander something they can ask for, put it into a planning construct, and then employ it. And then at the end of the day, I've got to deliver it through some type of concept of deployment to get it to the last tactical mile. So a lot there. It's a great question. And so, I look forward to figuring out, getting back what you think about all that. Okay.
Okay. Final question? Go. Okay. I think, Captain Jenkins, you were the first that raised your hand.
Captain Richie Jenkins, CEO of the Navy Supply Corps School. Thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts and your instructions with us. I'd like to pull on the thread a little bit of the intersection of risk and sustainment. With speed, lethality increases, and fighting distributedly, clearly the sustainment enterprise is going to have to keep up. And we're in the process of trying to train the students in our schoolhouse to think more combat logistics, combat sustainment, as opposed to peacetime supply. Mm-hmm. So, sir, do you mind sharing your thoughts on imperatives as well as concerns you have in that realm?
Yeah, let me just say there will be no conflict ever conducted that everyone is not in the weapon engagement zone. A lot of times I fight this idea that somehow you get to fight outside a weapon engagement zone. Has there ever been a battle we ever fought that wasn't by definition in the weapon engagement zone? So we're in there, okay? We're in there, right? My good friend Eric Smith likes to remind me, he goes, if we're not careful, because the enemy's got machine guns, I don't need a Marine force, okay? A Marine. So we're, this idea that we will have to sustain shots at us, either knock them down, take them on, and work through that has got to be part of our calculus. That's just the nature of this. So what is it that I can invest in that best allows Navy maneuver, which in me is of all the warfighting functions, the most important warfighting function. I'm a hunter myself. If I'm trying to get in range of my gun, I have to maneuver, right? Everything works through a maneuver warfare. And so logistics is no different than that. So the way, I'll just tell you how I prioritize my thinking on investments, and I think it'll best answer your question. When I want to spend $1 as the CNO, I look at this through a core investment and then a kill chain. And I'll talk about the second one in just a second. So what makes it into the core? In the core is the Foundry. So $1 well spent to me is in the Foundry, okay? Everything we do launches from what we rhetorically call the Foundry, okay? That's the machine that builds our capability to flow our Navy. And so if you're not careful, it will always be a bill payer. And then, if you 0.7 it every year and you go hit 0.7 your calculator for 10 years, before long, your base commanders can't spend plates to figure out how to rob Peter to pay Paul. And so that's where we find ourselves with a pretty fragile Foundry today, albeit dry docks, hangars, base infrastructure, piers, whatever that might be. Some CNO has to, no kidding, lean in and recapitalize the Foundry. That's me. People are, of course, in that. As sailors first is my mantra. The second dollar, and this is, the way I view the world is through strategic deterrence, okay? It doesn't do any good to think about what I'm going to do if I don't realize that an implicit assumption in every operational plan that we have, every war plan, if written or not written, is that the United States is not under strategic attack. It goes without saying that, again, this idea of continuity of decision-making, continuity of operations, continuity of government has to be not under strategic attack, right, for those things to work. So my contribution to that is through our sea-based deterrent. So there can be no chinks in the armor in that. You want to see why that's the #1 investment of the Department of War is because that's recognized. So those are $2 well spent. Now comes the third dollar, okay? And to your question, in the kill chain, which you all are very familiar with here, the one that rises to the top is my ability to prevent myself from being targeted. So counter-targeting has to be, the most important part of the kill chain, right? And so that's the umbrella that sets the condition for all maneuver warfare, albeit an oiler, a TAKE, a hospital ship, a strike group, an allies and partner, a Marine Littoral Regiment. All of that comes through my ability to counter those forces from being targeted. And that comes from, of course, maneuver itself is part of that. Point defense is part of that, okay? Obfuscation, deception, right? All those things that we do to make ourselves invisible, okay? And much of this stuff lives in space and cyber domains. Modern warfare is really about one targeting complex against the other. And those who can actually prevent themselves from being targeted will get their kit in position to actually conduct offensive fires most effectively. So to me, when I think about one, I reel back, we're always in the West, everyone's in there. And so what is the tide, the tide that raises all problems is a dollar well spent in counter-targeting. Okay, so that's kind of how I view it. And just to finish it out, I think the next one is targeting, then precision fires, right? Then point defense, and then, of course, logistics and sustainment's part of that. So it's the special sauce that makes all this work, okay? And the beauty of it, and I willingly accept to become the executive agent for that today. I think the Navy does this the best, okay, across the joint force. Everyone benefits from it across the joint force. So any scheme of maneuver, any capability, and any fight will enjoy a more chance of survivability and a lower level of risk if we have good counter-targeting. I think it goes without saying. So that's how I do that. That's what contested logistics looks like to me. It's being able to actually give the maneuver space for these activities to occur. Anything other than that, to me, I don't have a clear understanding of what it means to do that. So especially with the size of some of our oceans. Okay? All right.
Hey, CNO, I know you got to travel, so I really appreciate you taking the time to roll out your Navy warfighting instruction here today. And as you hit the nail on the head there with regards to, the joint force, the Navy, the importance of the Navy, our international partners and allies. But I also think, too, that your adversaries are listening to you, and they want to know what you're thinking. We'll provide you feedback on your presentation, sir. More importantly, we want you to come back. Rarely cited but often desired is the War College coin that talks about, war fighting, the support of, educating tomorrow's leaders and stuff like that, but more importantly about the war fighting and war gaming that we want to do for the Navy, sir. Thanks again.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it, my friend.
Sir.
Thank you.
Since you don't